Just when you thought 2026 couldn't get any wilder, the Supreme Court just dropped an economic bombshell that sent shockwaves through the global economy. In a landmark decision, they struck down the President Trump's sweeping tariffs, the very ones that have been blamed for rising prices on everything from electronics to everyday goods. So, the question is, does this mean the stuff you buy on Amazon is about to get cheaper? The answer is a lot more complicated and a lot more dramatic than you may think. Because in a world of high stakes politics and global trade, the story is never that simple. So stick around because we are breaking down what this historic ruling really means for Amazon, for President Trump's trade war, and most importantly, for your wallet. So, first, let's get into the ruling itself. On February 20th, the Supreme Court ruled 6 to 3 that President Trump did not have the legal authority to impose his wide-ranging tariffs under a 1977 law called the International Emergency Economic Power Act, or simply IEEPA. In the majority opinion, Chief Justice John Roberts laid that out plainly. The farmers did not vest any part of the taxing power in the executive branch. He essentially said that the power to tax and levy tariffs belonged to Congress, not to the president. He even pointed out that the fact no president before Trump had ever used this specific law to impose tariff was the strong evidence that it does not exist. As you can imagine, President Trump's reaction was swift and furious. He called ruling terrible. He said he was absolutely ashamed of the justices who voted against them, even calling them disloyal to our Constitution and even to lapdogs. This was a direct constitutional showdown, a clash between executive and judicial branches over who controls the country's economic levers. And for a moment, it looked like a massive defeat for a president's signature economic policy. But if you know Donald Trump, the story will not end there. Just hours after the Supreme Court's decision, the President Trump's fired back. He unearthed a little-known, never-before-used provision from the Trade Act of 1974, Section 122. This obscure law gives the president the power to impose temporary tariff up to 15% for 150 days, and that's exactly what he did. He signed a proclamation for a new 10% global tariff on almost everything, which went on effect on February 24th. So, to be clear, the old tariffs were struck down, but the new ones across the board tariff immediately took their place. There are some exemptions, like for our neighbors, Canada and Mexico, under the USMCA trade deal, and for certain specific goods like pharmaceuticals and some agricultural products. But for most countries and most products, this new 10% tax is now a law of the land, at least for the next 150 days, unless Congress decides to step in. And you'll ask, where did Amazon in all of this? So where did Amazon, a giant like an Amazon, fit into all of this? On the day of the rulings, Amazon stock actually jumped over 2%. Investors were initially optimistic. Why? Because Amazon is incredibly exposed to tariffs. Consider this. Over 70% of the products sold on Amazon Marketplace come from a third-party seller who sourced their goods from China. The old tariffs were squeezing these sellers hard, and that cost was being passed on you, the consumer. Even Amazon's own products like Amazon Basics line were getting hit significantly. When the cost of generic Amazon Basic battery goes up, it suddenly doesn't look so cheap next to the Duracell. It even affected Amazon's super profitable advertising business, as the sellers with squeezed margins cut back on their ad spending. And you probably relate to that a lot. Amazon's own CEO, Andy Jassy, admitted that tariffs had started creep into the price of some items, so initial thought was no tariff, lower cost for sellers, lower prices for customers, and bigger profits for Amazon is a win-win-win for everyone. And this brings us to the million-dollar question, or maybe $130 billion question, which is, much these tariffs have cost so far. Will actually you see the lower prices on your next order on Amazon? I had to bring a barrier of a bad news, but answer from nearly every economist is resounding no, and here's why. First, as we just discussed, the old tariffs were immediately replaced by a new 10% global tariff. It's a classic political bait and a switch. One tax goes away, new one appears. And the second, and this is a crucial point for online shoppers, the ruling did not bring back something called the minimis rule. This rule used to exempt packages valued under $800 from any tariffs. Its removal last year was a huge blow to companies like Amazon's and Temu and Shein that rely on shipping millions of small individual packages directly from overseas. That exemption is still gone, meaning those small ticket items are still subject to import taxes. And finally, the basic economics. Businesses that have been eating these tariff costs for years are not likely to immediately pass on any small savings to the consumers, meaning you. They'll use to recover their own battered profit margins. The reality is the global supply chain is a complex machine, and once prices go up, they rarely come down quickly. So, what's next, you may ask? In chaos mostly, the US government collected over 130 billion from these now illegal tariffs, and you can bet companies want their money back. Hundreds of businesses, from giants like Costco and FedEx down to small family-owned shops, are lining up and filing lawsuits to get a refund. The Supreme Court, however, completely sidestepped the question of how or even if these refunds should be paid out. So the Justice Brett Kavanaugh, in his dissenting opinion, warned that the process would likely be a mess. Well, no surprises there. This legal battle will likely be tied up in the courts for years, creating massive cloud of uncertainty for businesses trying to plan for their future. So let's have a recap of all we discussed. The Supreme Court recessed its authority over key aspects of economic policy. President Trump, in a deft political move, immediately found a new tool to continue his trade war, and you, the American consumer, are caught in the middle, unlikely to see any price relief anytime soon. This is a story that is far from over. The 150-day clock on the new tariff is ticking, and it sets up another major showdown between the President Trump and the Congress later this year. What do you think about all of this? Are you seeing higher prices on everyday items you shop? Do you think the Supreme Court made the right call? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, both as a seller and a consumer of Amazon. And if you want to stay top of the economics news that actually impact your life, be sure to hit that button and subscribe. And this is Ruben from PAS, Professional Amazon Services, and thank you for watching.